Richard.
AJ, we're gonna remember this moment.
Give me a talk real quick.
Hello, check, check, check. Chief Meteorologist Alana Brophy here. You're taking a live view from Dead Horse State Park of the solar eclipse in 2024.
The signals are fast, but we're not going to do a whole lot of moving, so it should work. Let's see how many megabits am I at here.
Check on and see if they can see it.
Well, Scott said they can see it, right?
He said that he was seeing it start up. Call him and see if I should start talking. You see it? Okay. 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 He's not getting audio yet. Hello, check, 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 check. Can you hear me? Chief Meteorologist Alana Brophy here. You're taking a live look at the solar eclipse in 2024. Okay, great. Are you going to take it and then I'll start talking? Okay. All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Scott. Bye. Hello, friends. We are live from Utah. Chief Meteorologist Alana Brophy here, joining you live from Dead Horse State Park, that is in between Arches National Park and Canyonlands National Park in eastern Utah. You're currently taking a live view of Solar Eclipse 2024. As you can see, clearer conditions on the eastern side of the state, while we are seeing a little bit of cloud cover hamper some viewing in northern Utah. Here in the Beehive State, you're going to be experiencing a partial eclipse, while millions of Americans are in the path of totality. Right now, you're watching the moon's shadow sweep across the United States, and that's going to continue as we get through the next hour and a half. As you take that live view from Dead Horse State Park, you're seeing that partial eclipse, which officially started here in the Beehive State at 11:16. When we talk about solar eclipses, this is when the moon is actually going to block the sun, partially here in Utah, but from Texas all the way up to Maine, it will be a total solar eclipse. This is interesting and rare, unique when it happens. What we have is this moon blocking the sun, which allows the outer atmosphere of the sun, known as the corona, to be visible. Of course, hopefully everyone has their eclipse glasses as they're looking at the eclipse right now from Utah and across the country. But this is a very, very interesting, rare event. We won't see another like this until 2044. Alaska is the exception there. They will see another solar eclipse, but most Americans will not be experiencing this again until 2044. The solar eclipse is very similar to the solar eclipse that occurred in 2017. I actually covered that one with the path of totality moving through Idaho Falls and passing over Utah. Many of you may remember that. That solar eclipse back in 2017 was similar to this one, but there were a few key differences. We're going to go over those as you take that live view from Dead Horse State Park as you're watching the 2024 solar eclipse. So when it comes to the 2017 solar eclipse, there were many people who were able to view that either online or in real life. What was different is that the moon was a little further away, so the path of totality a little more narrow in 2017. 2024, today, our solar eclipse is wider as the moon and sun are closer together, meaning there's a wide range of Americans who will be able to experience this. With the East Coast being more populated than the West Coast, the number of Americans that will be able to view this eclipse is larger. One of the key differences here when it comes to the 2017 and 2024 solar eclipse. Back in 2017, the path of totality ranged about over 12 million people were in that path. Today, an estimated 31.6 million people are living in the path of totality, not to mention all of the folks who travel to view this solar eclipse. AAA coming out and saying Texas was a big spot for many folks to visit. As you're watching that partial eclipse live near Moab, Utah right now, the Beehive State expecting this partial eclipse to hit about 63% where we're watching right now. 40 to 50% along the Wasatch Front, our populated area in northern Utah, but a better view here in eastern Utah, which is why ABC4 is bringing this to you live with an unobstructed view. Now, you don't have to live in the path of totality to experience the solar eclipse today in the United States. Actually, all 50 states will be experiencing either some sort of partial eclipse like Utah or total eclipse in those spots that we mentioned from Texas all the way to Maine. A few key facts for you. The totality of this solar eclipse is going to last longer than it did back in 2017. Another good comparison here for you. 7 years ago, the longest period of totality was near Carbondale, Illinois, and it was about 2 minutes and 42 seconds. That's actually where ABC Chief Meteorologist Ginger Z was live this morning. That's where the network is viewing the eclipse. This is odd and interesting because that area in the path both for these two solar eclipses, so interesting there. Today, the totality will last up to 4 minutes and about 28 seconds, and that is almost double the amount of time that we saw back in 2017. The durations for those longer periods of totality, they actually vary based on where in the path you are. Totality lasts the longest near the center of the path and starts to fade a bit as you get towards the edges of that path of totality. Taking that live look from Dead Horse State Park of the 2024 solar eclipse. Some good information coming from NASA. This was interesting. Back in 2017, the sun was nearing solar minimum. So when it comes to the solar pattern, we were in a solar minimum. Different today, we're closer to a solar maximum, which means that as folks are viewing that total eclipse, a partial eclipse here in eastern Utah, the sun will be near solar maximum. So the magnetic field is more active and may appear tangled. Streamers could be likely through the corona. Now, just a reminder, the corona is sun's outer atmosphere, and today, as the solar eclipse is taking place, the moon is blocking the sun, which makes that outer atmosphere, the corona, visible. So today could be interesting because folks viewing the eclipse could actually see streamers, which is different than 2017, and they'll get a view of that breathtaking corona. The live view from Dead Horse State Park in eastern Utah, in between Arches National Park and Canyonlands National Park, showing that unobstructed view as the partial eclipse is underway. We're about a half hour to peak eclipse here in Utah. That peak time will happen at 12:30, with the eclipse wrapping at 1:46 all mountain time. It began at 11:16, and as you can see, the solar eclipse is in process. Weather conditions varying around the country, even within the path of totality. Some folks have a better chance of viewing that total eclipse than others due to cloud cover and storm conditions. Here in Utah, cloud cover along the Wasatch Front could make viewing a little hampered, but on the eastern side of the state in Grand County, which is where we are, you've got clear conditions as the partial eclipse is underway. Actually, all mighty 5 of our national parks here in Utah expected to see decent viewing, perhaps a little more cloud cover near Zion National Park in Washington County. But when it comes to Arches, Canyonlands, Capitol Reef, and Bryce Canyon, The partial eclipse looking clear and visible. Again, in all the areas I just mentioned, expecting around 60% of a partial eclipse, while along the Wasatch Front it is 40 to 50%. We're going to leave you live from Grand County, Dead Horse State Park, showing you that partial eclipse happening now. Half hour from peak. We'll check back in with you, give you a few facts on the solar eclipse. Won't see this happen again until 2044. Partial eclipse here in Utah. Total eclipse from Texas all the way to Maine, with the time of totality increasing from 2017 from around 2.5 minutes to 4.5 minutes. And that long period of totality was expected in Mexico. We will see areas in the United States that also see totality upwards of 4 minutes. And again, best chance for that will be in the center of the path of totality. As you get towards the viewing area on the edges, that time will decrease. Live view from Moab. Enjoy the partial eclipse of 2024. If you're just joining us, this is Chief Meteorologist Alana Brophy. We are live from Dead Horse State Park as you're taking the live view of the solar eclipse 2024. It's a partial eclipse here in the Beehive State as we're reaching the peak 3 minutes away. 12:30 is when we will see the peak eclipse here in Utah. That's going to be 65% of an eclipse from where you're watching live, which is Dead Horse State Park in between Arches National Park and Canyonlands National Park. You're seeing that partial eclipse, and if you're looking at the video, you're able to see a crescent shape. We're catching that crescent shape on the pavement in shadows as that eclipse is happening now. A reminder here, when a solar eclipse happens, the moon is blocking the sun. There are many Americans in the path of totality. The solar eclipse path of totality expands from Texas all the way to Maine. It's a partial eclipse for the rest of the United States. That includes us here in Utah. And near Moab, it's more than half, 65%. The Mighty Five looking at around 50 to 60% of eclipse throughout the Beehive State. You're taking that live view right now. Arches and Canyonlands also had 65 and 66% of total eclipse, which we're just 2 minutes away from. Peak eclipse happening at 12:30 here in Utah. The Wasatch Front expected to see 40 to 50% when it comes to viewing for the eclipse. And that wide path of totality will be viewed by millions of Americans with the peak happening here in 2 minutes. We know that area of totality varies, in the center of the path of totality could be as long as 4 minutes and 26 seconds. It will be less than that as you get towards the edges of the path of totality. You may remember the solar eclipse of 2017's path of totality included the West Coast. Places like Idaho Falls, Utah had great viewing. But this eclipse impacting the central United States all the way up through New England. We're a minute away from peak totality here in Utah, which is a partial eclipse in the Beehive State. This 2024 eclipse path also passes over more cities and densely populated areas than 2017. So that's why an estimated 31.6 million people live in the path of totality compared to the 17 million that were back, 12 million that were back in 2017. So not only are more people living in the path of totality, many people from around the United States traveling to the path of totality. AAA saying Texas was a big spot for travel for folks to go and view this. We know weather conditions varying throughout the United States today, with cloud cover hampering the view in some spots as well as storms. But you're taking that live, clear view from eastern Utah right now as we reach peak eclipse. If you're watching live, 12:30, peak eclipse happening right now. And that partial solar eclipse for 2024 underway. This began at 11:16 a.m. We will see the eclipse wrapping at 1:46 p.m., all Utah time, so mountain time. But here we are sitting underneath peak, your live view from Dead Horse State Park of about 65% partial eclipse for the 2024 solar eclipse. The moon shadow now sweeping across the United States, with a partial eclipse happening in most of the 50 states, and a path of totality estimated to be seen by 31.6 million people living within that path. We appreciate you joining us live as you're taking that live view of the solar eclipse. When an eclipse like this happens, the sun's outer atmosphere, also known as the corona, becomes visible. It's a rare, unique experience. Won't happen again until 2044. 12:32 right now, with peak eclipse happening throughout Utah, including the Mighty Five, and you're currently taking that live view between Arches National Park and Canyonlands National Park as we sit at Dead Horse State Park with the Colorado River just below us and the partial eclipse happening now above us. When you compare this solar eclipse to 2017, an additional 150 million people live within 200 miles of the path of totality. So millions of Americans watching this with you right now. Partial eclipse here in Utah, but this solar eclipse is underway. A memorable, unique celestial event. During any total solar eclipse, totality lasts the longest near the center of the path and decreases towards the edge. NASA saying, don't worry if you're not in the center of the path, because while it comes down to it, the time in totality actually decreases pretty slowly once you get to the edge of the path, so not to be concerned. The 2024 solar eclipse different than 2017 in a few ways. The moon's a little closer this time around, which is why in 2017 we had a narrower path of totality, and why we see a wider one today, spanning from Texas all the way to Maine, as we're seeing peak eclipse right now in Utah. So every decade, maybe 11 years, the sun's magnetic field actually flips, and that causes a cycle of increasing or decreasing solar activity. Another noteworthy difference here between 2017 and 2024 is in 2017 we were near a solar minimum, so we were decreased when it came to solar activity. Today, a different story, closer to a solar maximum, which means people viewing the eclipse, catching a glimpse of that notorious corona, could actually see streamers which would flow into the air. And that was really restricted in 2017 to equatorial regions. But the sun will be near solar maximum, and the magnetic field today more tangled, so streamers likely visible throughout the corona, which will be interesting for those in the path of totality. Viewers also have a better chance to see prominences, and those appear as bright pink curls or loops coming off the sun, so likely going to see some reports of that coming from the central and eastern side of the United States. A partial eclipse happening now, a rare event at live view from Dead Horse State Park. You also can't rule out the chance of a solar or eruption of solar material during the eclipse because we are closer to solar maximum. The timing would have to be spot on for that. But the viewing that you're going to be seeing with this eclipse, very rare, very unique. As you're taking that live view of the partial eclipse here in Utah, just to remind you, you don't need to live within the path of totality to see the eclipse. We don't here in Utah, but we're witnessing this, and 99% of people who reside in the U.S. today will be able to see the partial or total eclipse from where they live. Even parts of Alaska and Hawaii will experience at least a partial solar eclipse, which is what Utah is seeing. So millions of Americans experiencing this with you as you watch live. Whether you're outdoors or online, you're still catching a view of a rare event happening now, with peak eclipse passing us at 12:36. We will continue to see this solar eclipse in our skies until about 1:46 Utah time. Here at Dead Horse State Park, we've got a lot of visitors with their solar glasses looking up towards the sky because of the clear viewing. We know that some cloud cover moving along the Wasatch Front initially hampered some viewing of the skies this morning, hopefully clearing for the partial eclipse happening now. We've seen fairly unobstructed views on the eastern side of the state with a few high thin cirrus clouds moving through Grand County, but the sun is out, and that clear path that you're viewing right now continues. We appreciate you joining us on ABC4.com. We'll keep these live feeds up as the partial eclipse continues here in 2024. Again, this won't be happening until 2044 again. So a unique experience, and we're really glad you had your eyes to the skies with us here in the Beehive State.